Enriquez's work?
No, I'm not.
I was just telling him that when he
John
spoke here,
Culver. You do.
when he spoke here in December of '05, Dean Elwood felt that he was literally the single most impressive speaker he'd ever heard
Uh-huh.
in his tenure at the forum. It was
Fabulous.
just riveting. It was
And what's
insightful.
your field? What do you, the area of the future that you focus on?
Can you hand the microphone to Governor Shaheen?
She'll probably use the podium too.
All right. So do you want me to just push the podium back forward again?
Oh, I forgot that.
Can we just hand it to her? That way she can.
Yeah, but he looks crazy for color. He's very nervous about
He's
looking
not
like a
gonna
fool.
know. He's not gonna know.
Do you think it's more complicated?
Okay,
No?
go ahead. I'm listening.
Is it not more complicated just to have the podium there and let them talk around it?
Whatever you want to do, buddy.
Let's just do that so she goes to the podium. I want her to do the same thing Paul just did because he's very freaked out
I
about
understand.
using the
I
podium.
understand. All right. I just was trying to.
Yeah,
Good.
I
Good.
know.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 40th anniversary of the Institute of Politics. For those of you who weren't here last night, we especially welcome you all back to Harvard and to the Kennedy School. I'm Jean Shaheen. I'm the director at the Institute of Politics. Actually, I'm the current director. I have to be careful about clarifying that because we have so many former directors here. We're very excited about all of the events we have today. But before we get to our esteemed panel, I wanted to let you know about something that we've done that we're going to be carrying through the day today. One of the things we thought would be interesting as we thought about the last 40 years would be to go back and talk to some of the students who had been through the Institute of Politics and talk to them about the impact that the Institute has had on their lives. So before each of our panels today, we're going to show some of those conversations with our former students. The one this morning begins with them talking about how the Institute has affected their career choices in life. So we will begin with that video.
I woke up one morning my junior year, having partied too much and feeling a little hungover, and thought, I'm squandering my years at Harvard and not taking advantage of the resources of the university. I picked up my Harvard Crimson, and there was an ad for the Institute of Politics, and I thought, this will be interesting. And there was a study group on politics and advertising. I signed up. I met some of the most extraordinary consultants and pollsters, many of whom are still working today, some of whom I've had the privilege to work with. And that summer, I joined a political consulting firm, and I've been there ever since.
Well, I'm from Gardner, Massachusetts, and the importance of summer work, and as a scholarship student here, I needed the resources during the summer. But I had a very keen interest in serving as an intern for my congressman, Robert Drinan, from the 4th District here in Massachusetts. Without the Institute of Politics, without the summer stipend I received, I never would have been able to go to Washington, never would have had this really transformative experience of understanding the legislative process, Capitol Hill, and it led to my very deep interest in going back to Washington once I was a graduate.
The IOP shaped the course of my life and shaped my experience in college, and I was enormously grateful for the experience I had there. The friendships and opportunities I had to talk with the senior board members and to work with them and to see them before our eyes shaping the Institute really instilled in me a sense of leadership that I didn't have before. It demonstrated it for me firsthand, and there's nothing like learning firsthand. And so I guess I would just express my overwhelming gratitude for all of their efforts that have made such a difference in the lives of so many young people.
Again, we'll be hearing from some of those students throughout the day, talking more about the Institute of Politics. Our first panel this morning is really the brainchild of the chair of the Senior Advisory Committee to the Institute of Politics. He is the former senator from Iowa and someone we are very grateful to for his years of service, not just on the national scene, but especially to the Institute of Politics, Senator John Culver.
Thank you very much, Jean. And at the outset, may I say on behalf of the Senior Advisory Committee how very grateful we are to you for your outstanding leadership of the Institute and the various programs that the students are involved with. At this time, it is a period of extraordinary change in the world. In a shrinking and a complex world, the margin of error for our nation is less, perhaps, than ever before. And it's more important than ever that actions and that we take, that thought be given by members of Congress, by educators, by citizens, as to what the consequences are to the future in which we're going to live as a result of those actions. We have given the future of the nature of the present system, politically, the electoral system. There's not a great deal of reward given to those who may advocate unpopular truths today to the electorate in order to achieve some larger, more desirable goal in the future. But nevertheless, it's imperative that those who do think in those terms be encouraged in their work. So we are very fortunate today, I think, to have some people here today to share with us some thoughts about the future that they envision, the future that all of you will inherit, and the solution to proper decisions in the future will really depend on an educated and an enlightened electorate, and that's you, what you demand of politicians and what you reward with those politicians. So I'm looking forward, as I think we will all experience, a very stimulating and rewarding discussion by our able panelists here today, and they'll help us think through the kind of future that hopefully will be more desirable and attractive than it otherwise might be. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to turn the panel over to our moderator today, Elaine Kamrak from the Kennedy School of Government. And Elaine, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
I think I'll just sit here because we're going to conduct a discussion here. We're really honored this morning to have with us three terrifically interesting people, and people who we're going to talk about not my future, but your future, the future of a lot of the students here at the Kennedy School. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each one of them, and I'll introduce them all at once, so then you can see the commonality here. And then we'll start with a couple questions and a discussion among the panel, but very quickly we will go to your questions. To my immediate left is Alvin Toffler. Now, some of you probably are getting bored of going into classes where the professor starts by saying, first there was an agricultural society, and then there was an industrial society, and then there was an information society. Because for a lot of you, you kind of came in at the information society stage. Well, many years ago, the first person to really understand this transition was Alvin Toffler. For more than 4 decades, he's been one of the most influential voices in business and intellectual life. His global impact comes not only from successfully predicting individual changes, such as the explosive rise of the computer in the 1960s, or simplistically projecting unrelated trends, but from identifying the newest forces behind change, synthesizing them, and putting them into a coherent intellectual framework. With his seminal work, Future Shock, which some of the young people in the room may want to go back and look at this point, he created a new discipline around the study of change and its impact on business and culture. Many of us here at the Kennedy School, myself included, have tried to use that same energy and intellectual rigor that he brought to think about change in the governmental sector, and I hope that Mr. Toffler will talk a little bit about that. Along with his wife, Heidi Toffler, he has written other significant books, notably War and Anti-War, Power Shift, and most recently, Revolutionary Wealth. His bestsellers have influenced everyone from the Clinton White House to the Republican Congress and many global corporations. He's a leading consultant to military and intelligence communities around the world and predicted, again, the rise of asymmetric, non-state-sponsored warfare in his 1993 book, War and Anti-War. Again, those of you students here at the Kennedy School, you kind of take asymmetric warfare as a term for granted, but believe me, in the early 90s and when I first went into the Clinton White House, this was anything but a term in common usage. Both Tofflers are distinguished adjunct professors at the National Defense University in Washington. Seated next to Mr. Toffler is Juan Enriquez. He is the chairman and CEO of Biotechonomy, LLC. He is a best-selling author, businessman, and academic. He's currently chairs a company that is researching and funding startups to enable the genomic revolution. The genomic revolution is something that's going to radically shape your lives, and it's beginning to shape mine, and I hope Mr. Enriquez will tell us more about it. He is founding director of the Harvard Business School Life Science Project and is the author of global bestseller, As the Future Catches You, How Genomics and Other Forces Are Changing Your Life, Work, Health, and Wealth. He's recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on the economic and political impacts of life sciences. He serves on a variety of boards, including Cabot Microelectronics, the Center for the Advancement of Genomics, the Harvard Medical School Genetics Advisory Council, the USDA Advisory Committee on Biotechnology Group. I bet you he spends a lot of time, Senator Culver, with farmers in Iowa on that one, right? And the Chairman's International Council of the Americas Society, and the visiting committee of Harvard's David Rockefeller Center. He previously served as CEO of Mexico City's Urban Development Corporation, Coordinator General of Economic Policy, and Chief of Staff for Mexico's Secretary of State, and a member of the Peace Commission that negotiated the ceasefire in the Chiapas Zapatista Rebellion. To his left is Dean Kamen. He's the founder of DECA Research and FIRST. He's an inventor, an entrepreneur, and a tireless advocate for science and technology. As an inventor, Mr. Kamen holds more than 150 US and foreign patents, many of them for innovative medical devices that have expanded the frontiers of healthcare worldwide. While still a college graduate, he invented the first wearable infusion pump, which rapidly gained acceptance from such diverse medical technologies as chemotherapy, neonatology, and endocrinology. In 1976, he founded his first medical device company, Auto Syringe Inc., to manufacture and market the pumps. At age 30, he sold that company to Baxter International Corporation. By then, he had added a number of other infusion devices, including the first insulin pump for diabetics. Any of you who know somebody who relies for their life on one of these devices should, maybe a grandparent, maybe even a parent, should understand that we're sitting in the room with a very important person. A decade ago, he founded FIRST. It stands for Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology, and since then has remained its driving force, its guiding spirit, and in the eyes of thousands of school children across the country, its personal embodiment. FIRST uses wholesale marketing and media techniques to motivate the next generation to learn about science and technology. He has personally recruited scores of the top leaders of American industry, education, and government in this crusade. So what we have here today are three people really who have been looking or creating the future for many years. And I want to open the discussion by starting with a really very simple question. You know, for me and my generation, Governor Shaheen's generation, when we talk to our children, the big change was the internet. Cell phones, the internet, I mean, so much happened that as a result of these technologies that our lives are very different from when we were undergraduates in college or even graduate students or even young mothers. And so my question to the panel is, for the undergraduates and graduate students in our audience today, what about the world is going to be so different? What will these people be telling their grown-up children in 20 or 30 years from now? Mr. Toffler?
Well, first, I would hope that they tell their children, or you tell your children, that nothing is certain, and that we can't know, in quotes, the future, and that there's no crystal ball. Moreover, I don't think it's one thing that we should be looking for. We should be looking at potential convergences in different quarters or different aspects of our lives. And I'm not going to talk much about technology because I got two people here who know a lot more about it than I do. But I want to talk just a moment about America's place in the world and the geopolitical situation, which I think will be radically different in 25 years from now. 2031 was the year we were told to think about. First, I think we may very well see, again, may is the emphasis because we can't be certain, but we may well see a shift from a unipolar world in which the U.S. basically is the dominant power to a potentially more dangerous multipolar world in which there are other powerful frequently competing forces on the global scene. And if we do think about that, imagine the possibility that some other country becomes the unipolar leader of the world. Whom might we prefer? China? Russia? Iran? I'm not so certain that we would want any of those to be the dominant world power. But I think, as I say, I think it's more likely that there won't be a single world power. Second, I think that we will see a further breakdown of the United Nations. I think a way to think about that is that the UN has many important functions that its specialized agencies do carry out, but it also has this administrative structure, which is, I believe, not just corrupt, but also inefficient, ineffective. So I think we may very well see a breakup of the UN. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a couple of competing UNs in the world. I think that we're going to see not just a further rapid growth of NGOs, but perhaps the creation of some sort of global NGO force, a kind of UN of NGOs, that we may well see, as I say, a global association of transnational NGOs or corporations with their own military forces. We may see increasing factionalism within the big religions, because that's what's happening in Iraq today between the Shia and the Sunni. In addition, we will, I think, face, as we do today, but perhaps in a much more complex and sophisticated manner, state, ethnic, or religious-based metastatic terror groups or alliances of these with criminal groups, and we might expect threats even from individuals who have control of weapons, of a weapon of mass destruction. That's all the bad news. Now the good news is, I think we will, or you will, live longer than we do, that we will humanize some of capitalism's excesses and rough edges, that we'll find multiple new sources of energy, that we will tear down the industrial age school system that most of you, I think, have come through, and invent new alternatives to that. That we will be compelled to de-bureaucratize business, but especially government. I believe we're going to see a series of institutional Katrinas in Washington, not just FEMA that was unable to carry out its mission, but institution after institution in Washington, I think, will be in the situation that FEMA is in today. And that we're going to have to invent a different way of organizing government, which is no longer pyramidal, hierarchical, etc. That we're going to be in the market for social invention, more and more new ways of organizing people to accomplish things without necessarily always doing what we know best, which is to create another bureaucracy. When we needed a Department of Homeland Defense, we took 14 or 15 little bureaucracies and we made one big bureaucracy out of them, which did absolutely nothing to help us. In fact, probably the reverse. So we have to get past the bureaucratic age, which is the industrial age. Bureaucracies made good sense then, they make terrible sense now. So there's a lot of room for social invention coming, and I think we'll see a lot of it. And we'll recognize and reward social invention. We give Nobel Prizes for breakthroughs in science or the arts, but why not for social invention as well? And finally, we'll invent new art forms and new forms of culture, and hopefully some new forms of music. But whatever 2031 becomes, I guarantee you this, it won't be boring.
Thank you. Juan, any piece of this you'd like to talk about?
So I think, sitting in the Institute of Politics, there's two trends that I think are going to drive what the 80th anniversary of this place would look like. The first trend is what will countries look like, and the second trend is what will drive those borders in those countries. And the first thing that we tend to do is we tend to take countries for granted. So we assume that what has been will always be. And that is a very dangerous assumption during a period of time where 3/4 of the flags in this world didn't exist 50 years ago. So countries rich and poor have been splitting, moving, becoming autonomous, seceding, and you've tripled the number of borders in Africa, Asia, and Europe over the last 50 years. Now, the only place in the world that hasn't changed borders has been the Americas. The last truly new border on the Americas was Panama in 1903. And any time in science or politics or anything else that you see an outlier that's that big, you begin to ask yourself the question, why hasn't it happened here? And will it happen here? And that, of course, leads to some very uncomfortable questions. So one of the ways of thinking about that question is imagine for a second that you took an inventory of current resources. Here's a place that's the world's dominant currency, the world's dominant manufacturing, the best universities, attracts the smartest people in the world, basically runs the world and is a unipolar empire. Well, oh, by the way, if you went back to 1902, that place was called Britain. And the person running Britain was a guy called Robert Cecil, Marquis of Salisbury. And he had a map up on his wall that was called Highways to Empire. So inside the British Cabinet Room, you had this map, 11 million square miles. And the question was, what do you suppose that map will look like in 1955? Had he asked that of his cabinet, he might have gotten the answer slightly wrong, because he went from 11 million square miles and the dominant currency and the dominant universities and the dominant industry to 89,000 square miles, which today is even breaking up further. So today you have autonomy movements in Scotland for the first time since 1246, and the fastest growing foreign language is Welsh. Now, if that can happen to Britain, and it can happen to France, and it can happen to Rome, then, as you go forward and project from the Institute of Politics today, it might be worth asking the question, how many stars do you suppose will be in the US flag in 50 years? Now, why is that a reasonable question? I mean, everybody knows it would be 50, right? Except there's never been a US president buried under the same flag he was born under. Ever. So as you project forward, you could say less, you could say more, depending on whether you want to project global trends or US trends, because this is one of the very few nations on Earth that has gotten consistently larger since independence. And there's a whole series of other talks that we can go down that particular path. Now, what is going to drive this change? There's two things that I think will drive this. One is our ability to get along and to manage, and that sometimes drives me to despair, given some of the current polarization. But on the other hand, there's an awful lot of invention in this place. And if there's something that's going to drive the US and maintain it in a dominant position, it's going to be education and science and technology and the ability to adapt to new language. Because the single most important trend you're going to see over the next 30 years is a shift in the dominant language on the planet. We started out painting on cave walls with little hieroglyphs, and then we stylized and standardized those into little pictographs like Chinese language or Japanese language. And then we collapsed that into 26 letters and ABCs, and that made it a lot easier to teach people. Made it a lot easier to transmit data, to print books. What we did over the last 30 years is we collapsed all notation systems, all languages on the planet, English, French, Spanish, Aramaic, Chinese, Russian, into ones and zeros. Every alphabet, 2 letters. Every word written and spoken, 2 letters. We also collapsed every notation system in music. 12-tone scale, doesn't matter. It all became ones and zeros. We also collapsed all images. So every image on the planet, still and moving, can now be digitalized. So that's the most powerful alphabet you've ever seen on the planet. That's 93% of the data transmitted today. Those nations that didn't understand this stuff got poor very quickly. Those schools that didn't adapt got poor very quickly. Those regions that didn't understand that got poor very quickly. What we're going to see over the next 30 years is a transition in language to understanding and using life code. So basically what's going to happen is this little apple is going to become a diskette. Except you don't plug this thing into the wall. This thing doesn't execute ones and zeros. This thing executes DNA. 4 letters code all life forms on this planet. A, T, C, G. To execute code, this thing falls to the ground. And the first line of code says ATAACGG means make a root. Next line of code, CATAA, make a stem. GCAA, make a flower that's white, that blooms like this, and smells like this. Last line of code, execute again. Now, in the measure that you understand life code as digital code, in the same ways you can change digital code to change a picture or a language or to translate, you're going to be able to take any life form and execute code. That means you can program bacteria to execute code. That means that you can make plastics in corn. That means that you can make medicines in goats, and that little factory across the river, the Genzyme factory, will be substituted by 20 goats that are now growing in western Massachusetts that are worth $1 million a piece. And there will be farmers in this world that will continue making goats for Saturday's lunch, and there will be farmers that will be farming medicines. Those countries that educate their kids and understand this trend will do a hell of a lot better and will survive a lot longer than countries that keep doing more of the same. Now, what gives me hope in this stuff is, on the one hand, we can learn from people like Louis Cabot, who's sitting over here, who was chairman of the Boston Fed, who was chairman of Brookings, and who led some of the technology developments that made this country so strong. And on the other hand, sitting over here, we've got Robin Chase and Roy Russell, founders of Zipcar, those little neat little green cars that are running around. And both of these folks are still willing to learn. And both of these folks get up at 9 o'clock in the morning to come talk about politics and the future of the US, and both of them really care. And in the measure that you have a society that brings people from those 2 generations together into debates like this, and that you've got people like Dean Kamen running around making 100+ inventions and changing the world and putting hundreds of thousands of kids into education, we've got a very good shot at making these borders pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you. Dean?
I don't have to say anything.
You got great press there.
They said it. My understanding is that there are primarily people here interested in. My understanding is. My understanding is that most of the people here are interested in the social sciences or in politics. That's not my field, and I'm trying to find a way to make my comments somewhat relevant, but the question was, look at 2031 and see what the big differences are. I think there's very, very diametrically opposed ways to look at that. The pure technology, what will be different and what the world will look like. A couple of observations about predicting. One is, at least in the world of technology, everybody I've ever talked to, every book I've ever read on the subject, people dramatically underestimate what the long term will be and dramatically overestimate the short term. We're always enthusiastic about our projects, and so we predict we'll do this in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years, and every plan I ever look at the end of 5 years, people are disappointed. They got it wrong. It takes longer than we thought. Then you look out 10 years, and you look back, and some monumental change that nobody saw coming happened. And so I would just summarize the reason I'm reluctant to predict the future by saying we will be overly aggressive and disappointed in the short run, but we will be so far off about how much further we changed in the long run that it would be stupid to run the risk of making predictions as far out as 2031. Particularly because one thing I can assure all of you is while human beings are still changing, I think at the same slow rate we always have, technology really is changing at an ever-increasing rate. Moore's law really works, not just for semiconductors, but for all things. So the rate of technology advance is so fast that our ability to get it really, really wrong will accelerate into ever shorter periods of time. 100 years ago, we had Henry Ford making cars. 130, 140 years ago, you had Thomas Edison. If either of those 2 people walked into this room right now, they'd get it. The light bulbs, a little higher color temperature, a little more efficiency, but Thomas Edison would say, it's Good thing. Those light bulbs. Henry Ford would say cars. Yeah, engine, transmission, four wheels, cup holders. That's what's changed in 100 years. But he gets it. I think there is virtually no chance that 30 years from today, not 100, but 30 years from today, there's no chance anybody in this room will even, if they suddenly went to sleep and came back 30 years from today, you won't be able to recognize or understand where we get our energy from, how it's formed. Is it proteomic, genomic, the result of biological activity, direct photon to electron conversion? I think the rate at which technology is moving is so fast that we won't have the generation to get used to it. And most people, I think, consider technology, my only definition of it these days is anything that wasn't available when you were a kid. To my grandparents, airplanes were technology. To my parents, computers were technology. To me, maybe the internet's technology. To kids today, all of that stuff is infrastructure. They take it for granted. None of that's technology. If you're asking what in 30 years will be considered technology, I can tell you I don't know. But, and it's a big but, I don't think technologists can afford in 30 years to be the way they've been for the last 200, which are the people that sort of stick with what can be done. Can I make a semiconductor? Can I make a laser? Can I make fission? For a long time, technology was what can be done. Even when I was a kid, can we keep a person alive forever? That was the goal of medicine. Bring this thing into a hospital no matter what it takes. Make a liver, make a heart, make an iron lung, rebreathe it. You know, what can we do? Can we put a man on the moon? We did that. I lived in the time when people were so confident that technology was moving so fast. What can we do? I think 30 years from today, technology will be, what should we do? We can't afford to, and it's not probably even desirable to the patient, him or herself, to live forever in a very diminished state. Should we put our resources into accomplishments that might take huge resources when 2 billion people have no water and the number one source of death on this planet is Cryptosporidia giardia, and you know, we don't need exotic new technologies for health, we need clean water. I think we'll live in a world where the technology community has to have much more of a influence on what is being done as opposed to what can be done, i.e. leaders, whether they are science and technology people that decide to take a social position or whether you are leadership people, you ought to go back and learn what science and technology is and isn't so that you can intelligently make decisions. That hasn't been a big deal for political leaders, I think, forever. It's going to be a really big deal in the future. And the only really optimistic news I have about why I think there'll be a convergence of the technical community and leaders really starting to understand it is in every generation before this one, the technical achievements were the intended consequences of what we did. The unintended consequences of what we do with technology have always been the burden of the next generation. Whatever the Industrial Revolution, we made those locomotives. It took a long time before the next generation said, wow, this is polluting or causing. We make plastics, it's a long time. Almost anything we do, we set out to do, we accomplish. That was the intended consequence. But in a very complex world, the multiples of unintended eventual consequences become the problems for the next generation to deal with. At the rate at which technology is moving, the unintended consequences are also going to be shrunk down so that the really stupid things that result from you not thinking out the full system will come back and bite you directly.
Great.
And you'll have to live with your own problems, so you'll be more cautious about it.
Thank you. Let me pose a second question to the panel. You know, 20 years ago around here, when we talked about national security, we thought of Russians, we thought of tanks, we thought of airplanes. Increasingly now, when we think about national security, we think of two issues that really weren't in the purview of political science back then. One is global disease patterns, whether it be AIDS, whether it be SARS, whether it be avian bird flu, some kind of global pandemic. And related to that is global warming. okay, and the consequences of climate change and what that could mean for political instability, for refugee movements, for a whole variety of what we used to think of the kinds of disasters that used to come out of wars, but now could in fact be coming from environmental movements. If you go forward to our year of 2031, what would you like to see happen with regard to these two threats, whether it's technological or political or both? Juan, shall we start with you just to mix it up?
So I don't know what's going to happen in 2031. I can tell you what's happening today, which is really interesting, and that is we're beginning to understand disease as code, and we're beginning to understand life as code. So life is imperfectly transmitted code. And if you're in the wrong part of the world, a mosquito comes through the air, and a mosquito is a flying hypodermic needle. And it goes bzzz, and inserts some code into you. And that code gets into your cell and makes your cell a Xerox machine. And it goes copy, 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 and the cell breaks apart and infects other cells. Those cells become Xerox machines, and they go copy, 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 and they infect other cells, and you come down with malaria, or you come down with dengue, or you come down with equine encephalitis, or whatever that mosquito has transmitted. Now, in the measure that you start to understand mosquitoes as hypodermic needles, there are now projects in Africa to alter the genomes of the mosquito saliva to inject African cattle against disease. Because if a mosquito can put a disease into you, it can also put a vaccine into you. Now, in the measure that you start to understand disease as code, you can take an average influenza virus and break it up into 15,988 ATCGs, base pairs. And oh, by the way, if you change two of those base pairs, one around the 418 and one around the 759, those two changes in letters killed more people in World War I than all the bullets and all the bombs and all the gas. Because the Spanish influenza was two letters changing in an influenza. And as we begin to understand disease in this structure, as we begin to understand cancer as a series of instructions that have gone wrong inside your body, we are going to live an awful lot longer because we're going to learn how to remake things like body parts. Okay? Each of your cells contains your entire gene code. Each of your cells is a diskette that has 3.2 billion letters in it, and they're folded into a trillionth of an inch. And it's an entire copy of what you are with the exception of some blood cells. And in the measure that you understand that, then a very small part of that program makes skin, and another part makes stomach, and another part makes bone, but what's you is inside your bone and your stomach, and you can take cells from your skin and ostensibly make stomach out of it, or make bone. And what that means in practical terms is that pretty much every person in this room is likely to live 10 years longer than they thought they were going to live. And some of the people in this room are going to live 30 years longer or 40 years longer because we're going to start remaking body organs. That's already happening in chickens that have extra wings over at Cliff Taben's lab at the Harvard Medical School. And that makes a big difference today because today we have more people walking around limbless than any time after the Civil War. And the reason for that is we've gotten so good at body armor, we've gotten so good at evacuation, that a lot of wounds that would have killed people in Afghanistan or Iraq now survive. And if you can make 3 wings on chickens, and if your entire program is inside each of your cells, those cells already made 1 arm and 2 arms. And in the measure that we understand that, we're going to change medicine in a fundamental way by regrowing things like body parts.
Wow. Okay. Actually, I asked a scientist this last summer when the doctor was busy shooting stuff in my knee to make it work again. I said, how come you can't take something from my elbow and put it in a test tube and grow me some new cartilage? He says, we're working on it. We're working on it. Dean?
Well, to your very last point, by the way, the specific numbers are 1,600 of our young people are now back from the issues in the Middle East, missing at least 1 arm has a full shoulder disarticulation, and a few of them are missing both. When you see somebody missing both, missing only one seems like a minor inconvenience. You could get through life with. I think that to bracket your time frame of 2031, I'll give you the short term and the long term. In the short term, we are in fact, one good thing that our government has now done is said, these people deserve a lot more than a hook. And they came to us and said, I want to build a fully articulated 21 degree of freedom arm that is neurally controlled by the brain. Put it on somebody and have them be able to pick up a raisin or a grape, know the difference without looking at it, put it in their mouths without destroying it. I told our government, you're nuts, you read too much science fiction. But I spent 3 months traveling around the country to major universities, hospitals, research centers. I went back and said, I still think you're nuts, but not as nuts as I thought. And we've taken on the job of doing this. We have most of it built. We're working with a group that is in fact taking undifferentiated cells, making motor neurons out of them. We are going to connect the brain to a residual limb, have that radio communicate to the rest of this thing, and within 2 years we will have a device that's not quite as good as the original equipment, but not bad. In the short run, that's happening. In the medium term, I think you're right, we'll do it much more organically and better, inject something in and have the limb grow back. But I think even that's only medium term, because in the long run, the big picture, the ones and zeros that you really care about aren't the bone or the stomach or the arm, it's you. It's the collection of what's over your lifetime gone into, let's call your storage of data that makes you different than you and you different than you. And why do all this stuff to maintain the old hardware when what's you is what's up here? And rather than fix all the body parts, let's just do a mind transplant. I would just take what information is what makes you you, everything from your ethics to your choice and preferences in music, take it out, put it on what is then the equivalent of a memory stick, put it in a whole new piece of hardware, and you go again. So you will never die, because the you is an intellectual thing, not a physical thing, and we'll just keep changing in the old hardware, get rid of the old car, take on the new equipment, and move forward. That will make life particularly interesting. And one thing it'll do is the lawyers will have really a cow with who you are, when, if ever you die, who has responsibility for what. But I think almost more importantly, it's going to make people neurotic, because every day you make choices. I drove down here. Anybody that's rational would never choose electively to drive in Boston. I mean, you wouldn't do it. But we all make decisions every day because we sort of understand that life is full of risk and you got to go sometime anyway. And in reality, we take huge risks every day. If you thought that other than accidents, you would live forever, I think people will end up in some version of getting into a nice padded cell every night, put their football helmet on before they touch the pillow with it and go. So I think our perspective of what life is, how do we take care of it, how do we share it, will dramatically change when your children realize that death is not likely to be something they have to worry about.
Alvin, that was terrific.
It is indeed. But it raises one further issue. How will the various populations and religions of the world confront all of this? I believe that the issues that we will fight about will be moral, and that we're going to face enormous battles over the morality of each of these developments. I mean, if we extend what you're saying, and I take it to be extendable, we will be creating new forms of human beings, but we'll also be creating new forms of creatures. If we get the mosquito to deliver but we may be doing something with, who knows, tigers, snakes, whatever. We may have intelligent snakes.
We have them. They live in Congress.
So the entire nature of the human species is in question, or will be in question. And if people around the world can get as excited as they do today about Islam, Christianity, and so on, without having had to face these issues, what will it be like when the world begins to face these issues, coming at them from very different cultures and very different value systems? So it may be that we will face tremendous conflict about this before it becomes accepted, shall we say. I mean, what will be accepted and what won't be accepted, we don't know. And we don't know what forms of human being how we will define the human being of the future.
May I add to this? Look, there's four big questions sitting out there. There's who and why, and what and how. And the problem is that religion answers the first two. So you can answer the who and why based on your religious beliefs. But when religion starts to cross over and tries to say, I have the only answers to all four questions, and you can no longer legitimately ask the other two questions, because I will explain to you how and what, then societies get into huge trouble. And the best example of that is Islam, because Islam in the year 1100, 1200 was the dominant intellectual force on the planet. And the universities in southern Spain had the absolute best hydrologists, botanists, pharmacologists. The early anatomy books and the early astronomy books come out of religious Arabic texts that are done in the universities of southern Spain. And oh, by the way, there was a whole bunch of fundamentalism going on in the world that was burning people at the stake, and that was Christianity. So it was Jewish scholars working in Muslim universities that translated the Arabic text into Latin and brought science into Europe. And then that religion started saying not just who and why, but they tried to explain what and how. And when those things cross over, then you have a real problem in a society.
One last question, which this all leads to, and then we'll open it up to the floor, which is there any piece of the scientific inquiry that you think is actually dangerous?
Again, I mean, I think literally almost 100 years ago to the day, I think it was Jules Verne that said, life is a race between education and catastrophe. And I think the education he was talking about was the futuristic scientific methods by which we will find ever more efficient and larger scale ways to annihilate each other. But I think it's kind of a simplistic question, because you could go back to the hammer, you know. You can use it to drive a nail, you can use it to break your thumb. I've never seen a technology that couldn't be a tool or a weapon. But whether the technology is a tool or a weapon has nothing to do with the technology. It's amoral, it's even less than amoral. It doesn't deal with issues like that. People do. So all technologies that succeed are amplifiers of something. In the early days, we needed to amplify human strength, so we first used animals, and then sailboats, and then the Industrial Revolution, and electricity. Now we came to an age where we can make amplifiers not for our muscles. I mean, from a shovel to a bulldozer was a pretty big leap. That mechanical leap is tiny compared to writing things down and doing addition to a microprocessor or the internet. Now we're in an age where what we're amplifying is our capability to calculate and store data and information. So the rate at which we can amplify what we do has gotten larger, but it's just an amplifier. It allows us to do good better. It allows us to do bad phenomenally better. We will soon be at a place where the average individual on this planet, having access to a small enough amplifier, can be heard by the whole world. The upside of that is any one individual anywhere will come up with that cure for cancer or AIDS, and it will be on the internet in minutes. The average individual out of the 6.3 billion people will have the capability to infect the world, or to put a huge energy source that spontaneously becomes a lot of heat somewhere in the world. We will soon live in a world where individuals or small groups of people with huge technical amplifiers, genetic, proteomic, physics, will have the capacity to impact billions of people. And the bad news is thousands or millions of good people helping each other don't have more sway than one or two or three bad people using the same tools as weapons.
Great. Alvin?
How do you govern? Who and how in a world of such empowered individuals? And the answer, I don't think, is in political science texts. because we're confronting issues that, as you've heard, are so incredibly new and so potentially enormous that all our books are obsolete when it comes to this, particularly when it comes to the issue of conflict resolution, government, and order. If there is I want to talk about the word order for just a second, that when order breaks down, the people who suffer most are the people at the bottom. And it seems to me that if we're going to survive as a species, we're going to have to figure out alternative ways, very, very presently unimagined ways of coping with all of this stuff. And you guys are going to have to do that. We're not going to be around. You guys are going to have to do that. And in order to do that, you're going to have to read stuff and think stuff that is not available to you yet, and that you yourselves will create, and you will imagine. And imagination, I think, is a big, big piece of this, because simply linear extensions of what we now have, whether in government or in politics or in certainly in education, linear extensions of what we have will not get you through.
Juan, last word, and then if people want to line up, we'll take some questions from the audience.
So let me go back to the place where I started. The trend today is to generate more and more countries. And it's happening in more and more places. And if you double the number of countries in Europe over the next 30 or 40 years, it wouldn't surprise me. Because you do have people in Italy that want to separate northern Italy. You do have people in Austria. You do have people in France, Netherlands, Belgium, England, Spain, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing about this stuff is the stereotype is it's the poor, the oppressed, the religiously downtrodden that separate first. That's not true. What actually is happening is it's the rich who leave first. And you're getting this phenomenon of a suburbanization of countries. So when you watch the breakup of Yugoslavia, it's actually the richest region of Yugoslavia that wanted to join the EU and understood there's no way in hell that they're going to admit Yugoslavia, but we have an income per capita similar to Italy, and if we leave, maybe they'll admit us. And oh, by the way, when the Slovaks went to the Czechs and said, we'd like to leave, the Czechs basically said, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Right? So what you're getting is this trend where, there's two versions of this. One is the rules are getting flat, which is Tom Friedman's argument, but that's half of it. The other half of it, which is just as important, is what Richard Florida is saying, which is the world is getting very spiky. So you're getting real concentrations of wealth and power and knowledge and ability to understand and generate and cope with this world in a very few places. And you're sitting in one of the zip codes of the world that truly matters. This one and 02139 and the medical school are absolutely at the center of what is changing. And you're sitting with a front row seat on the Renaissance that's going to be driven by life sciences. And there's 239 companies that are right around MIT that are life science companies, each of which thinks it's going to be a billion-dollar company. And the three largest Swiss pharmaceutical companies merge, Ciba and Geigy and Sandoz, into Novartis, and they move into the old Necco candy factory over here. And the largest building Harvard's built is the new research building, which is the genetics building at the Harvard Medical School. So this is a very spiky place. It's attracting a whole series of ability to understand, generate, cope with change. And there's a whole series of parts of the world, even in the United States, that are absolutely left behind. And you can see that in reading trends. If you actually map on Amazon, here's what people who are, liberal are reading. They are all exchanging books. It looks like a spider web. If you read this, buy this. People who are conservative are all doing the same thing. The only book that they're reading in common is Bernard Lewis's What Went Wrong. And you're getting these real divisions in who watches cable, in how congressional elections are run, in what people are reading and what people are listening to. And those divisions can come back to haunt you in a very spiky region. And let me remind you, the most autonomy and secession-prone area of the United States has not been the South. It has been New England. And New England has tried to secede from this union 4 times. And they tried to write the right to secession into the Constitution, arguing as this great nation expands south and west, we will lose control over our politics and destiny and economy. And we have to be very careful with what we call each other, how we treat people who speak other languages, how we deal with people who have different religious beliefs, because the words you use today can become really divisive tomorrow. And if we want to keep this as one country, 50 stars, one unity, you have to really be careful that you don't generate what happened in Quebec, where every single license plate reads, Je me souviens. I remember. I do not want to see license plates in California that say, Yo me acuerdo. That would be a very poor idea.
Anybody, students, come on up to the microphone, or anyone. Yes, give us your name and what school you're with.
I'm Paloma Zepeda, and I'm an alumni of the Student Advisory Committee at the IOP. And I had a question about the character of change. I was wondering if the panel thinks that if continuous positive growth is possible.
Yeah, can you do a little louder, actually just a little, and there's a clarity question. Okay, so maybe step a little teeny bit back from the mic.
Okay.
Okay, start again.
Okay. I was wondering if the panel thought if that continuous positive growth was possible, or do we really need, in most areas of change, institutional Katrinas, like Mr. Toffler mentioned?
Do you believe that continuous positive growth is possible, or do you need an institution between us?
No, an institutional Katrina, like Mr. Toffler mentioned.
An institutional Katrina, as you said.
To make something happen.
To make something happen, right?
Oh, well, I think that even with an institutional Katrina, it may be difficult socially and politically to figure out what to do. And therefore, we need a lot of different kinds of experiments, most of which will fail, but some of which will be useful. And we need to put together, we need to try out, try putting components together that were never put together before. Maybe I should tell the story. This is trivia, but listen. Not far from where we live, there is a car wash. Now, you all take your cars to get washed occasionally. This is the only car wash I've ever seen where when you drive in and you give the car to the guy and he hands you a bill and you go inside to pay, you suddenly find yourself no longer in a car wash, but in a bookstore. In a bookstore which I found Greek classics, the writings of Tom Paine, etc., etc., etc. Now, these are two things that nobody else, as far as I know, thought to put together. Now, that's the kind of thinking we're going to have to do and experiment with, putting things together that were never put together before. And you guys are going to have to dream those things up, because if you just put them together the way they've been put together, they're clearly failing, and they're not going to work. Right. So there ought to be a Nobel Prize for social invention, for trying out these various strange new relationships in the social structure.
Great. Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll go right to the questions. Yes, over here.
Hello, I'm Angelina Clark. I'm actually a research associate at the Belfer Center, one of the centers at the Kennedy School. And my question is, do you have any advice for sort of policy people, leadership people, on how they can keep abreast of these incredible technological changes when there's so much to read and a surplus of information already? What are the best sources? It's a process question.
You want to try it, Dean? Here.
I think that, again, there's an incredible ingrained cultural, social piece, dangerous piece of our culture by which people in the arts or people in politics or in social sciences not only don't try to stay abreast of science and technology, they literally, either because they think it's beyond them, those geeks, or because they think it's beneath them, don't even make an effort. And I'd argue that if you knew an adult somewhere, and I won't tell you which first lady, but a first lady of the United States visiting one of my science centers, once said to me, as I was explaining actually some electricity and magnetism, she said, "Oh, math, I could never do that." And I was thinking that maybe she also can't read. But if she happened to be a person that couldn't read, she wouldn't go out of her way to make a public statement about it as if it's not only acceptable, but somehow appropriate. Whereas people that think science and technology is something that they're, quote, no good at or put no effort into somehow think that's okay. You know, nobody wants to be illiterate, which is what we call it, but to be innumerate is not a problem. I think people that intend to take leadership roles in anything in this world have got to understand science and technology and its implications. I think one of the really bad things about people in the sciences who typically don't go out of their way to make the rest of the world know what's going on, is they're their own worst enemy. We make it seem arcane, difficult, esoteric. It is not. It is elegant, beautiful, and simple. If you were to read the laws of physics, you know, there's only about a dozen things you need to know. Newton's laws, the 2 laws of thermodynamics, Maxwell's 4 equations on electricity and magnetism, second law of thermodynamics is a nice one. You can put them on one piece of paper. You go try to read the laws of Congress. There's 10,000 pages on taxes. They're inconsistent. They're inaccurate. I mean, trying to understand the patchwork of what people make as laws that have no general theme, no fundamental rule, no guiding principle. They're transient. They are inconsistent. They're illogical. I think there should be a serious effort not to have passing vocabulary for the cocktail party, but it wouldn't take people that are not scientific very long to understand at a level that would be meaningful the issues of genetics and proteomics and nuclear opportunities. It requires some discipline, which you need to develop, and then you need to find people and create within our educational institutions ways to put this information out that aren't deliberately making it, again, esoteric and arcane. And we should soon have a society where people don't feel comfortable to say, oh, math, I don't know those things. If you don't know those things, get out of the way. You're dangerous.
Very good. I wanted to say that one of the nice things about our panel today is I think that they've made some pretty obscure things to non-scientists very clear. And I loved your description of the simple description of genomics as an alphabet. I mean, that makes clear. There's a lot of great scientists around who can actually make these translations for the rest of us. We had a panel here not too long ago where someone explained nanotechnology to me as follows. They said, in the past, we grew the tree, we cut down the tree, and we made the table. And in the future, we will grow the table. Now, I have no idea what's in between all that, okay? But all I know is that sometimes these very good science writers, some of these very articulate people like we have today, can actually make this translation in ways that the rest of us can really know what, as much as we need to know for our own work. Over here. Oh, sorry, I didn't even see you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Carol Martin. I'm a 91 alumna of the school. And when I was here, I belonged to a group called the Physicians for Genetic Screening. And we had molecular biologists and cellular biologists. We had one ethicist, and I was the only policy person. So to your comment about having that kind of comprehensive analysis or more organic involvement in the process of both the regulations and the implications of what the technologies will be when they begin to unfold on us, I think is very critical. That was one group that was sort of outside the realm of the organization. What I see with the universities is that they are making entities where different disciplines work together, but not all the disciplines. So at MIT with the physics and the neuroscience and the biotech, that's together, but the humanists and the social scientists are not in that same building. So just one observation. And then my other question is with the future that you describe, education is key. And we're dealing right now with the issue of no child left behind and the whole issue of the schools, the sad state of the schools across the country. And so my question to you is, what do you do with, how do you address the issue of all of the children in all of the schools who are behind just generally, and then with the future issue that they'll need to have the kind of education in science and technology, how do you address that?
You want Alvin and Dean, maybe the two who've really worked on that, and of course Juan, if you...
Well, the first thing I would do is look upon our public education system as an enemy of the future. The public education system in the United States didn't come into being despite many people asking for their kids to be educated and others saying we can't afford them not to work and so forth. Big struggle through the 1800s until business got involved and said, you know, these rural kids who are coming to work, they don't have, quote, And these were indeed the terms: industrial discipline. What is industrial discipline? Show up on time. Do rote and repetitive work again and again for the rest of your life. March when the whistle blows. Change classes on schedule, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the object was to prepare a workforce for a growing industrial society. Well, those are clearly not the skills that we need for the kind of world we're creating, and the social and political and organizational world that we're. It took, unfortunately, it took longer than I had hoped for Bill Gates to speak up. And Bill Gates has said, we don't need to reform the system, we need to replace the system. Now, what do we replace it with? I think there has to be a lot of experiments, and we need to ask some fundamental questions that are really scary. For example, not only the question of, do all kids have to start school at the same age? Why, for heaven's sake? But also, who says all education takes place in schools? You know, I give the example of the PC. In 1976, we bought a PC. There were very few. The first PCs that you could buy were in Radio Shack stores. And a few guys went in the stores, and some kid with pimples, boy, with a science fiction book in his back pocket, said, "There's this wonderful machine out here." And a few people bought it. He said, "But how do I use it?" He said, "Well, you punch a few buttons here, and something happens." They went home, punched the buttons, did a little bit, went back to the store for another lesson, right? And the store said, "Well, now you can do such and such." But pretty soon it became clear that they needed more sources of information and better education. And they began to ask, those who had the machines began to ask each other the questions. Everybody needed a guru. Who was a computer guru? Anybody who had bought a computer a week before you, right? Now, as a consequence of that process, 90 million people know how to use PCs? I don't know what the number is today. It's universal, right? Without many people going to school. So there's a lot of learning, there's social learning going on outside the institutional structure. We need to know how to relate to that and use it. We also need to ask really fundamental questions. Should education, in quotes, be compulsory? Now that's a big one. That's a really big one because it's fundamentally political and social. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be, but I'm suggesting that an issue at that level, issues at that level of complexity and danger, almost political danger, are going to have to be confronted before we can invent some kind of educational process that makes sense for the world that we're describing over here.
Now, Dean, you've done a lot in education with science and technology. You want to add?
I would say almost the limiting extrapolation of your statement about whether we need to reform or replace it is to point out that the public education system really is a 19th century construct trying to deal with a 21st century problem. Yeah, exactly. And that won't work. And whether you want to reform it by whatever is the extreme definition of reform or replace it, either way, there's a couple of practical issues. The scale of it, the number of people involved in it, the percentage of our tax dollars that go toward it. For all sorts of reasons, when you look at what's there, it's one of the largest, most complex, most expensive, high inertia social public institutions out there. I think it would be naive even for the eternal optimist like me to think we can fix, change. So I said, let's do something different, which sort of on the edges will hopefully have an impact. I said 14 years ago, and Governor Shaheen has been a great supporter of this, in the little state of New Hampshire, I said, why don't we not deal with how do you change all the teachers, how do you change, we don't need this industrial-based stuff. What we need is kids to be enthusiastic about science and technology. Very few teachers of math or science have enough personal experience at that to transfer the passion for it. We, for lots of reasons, said, let's not go into the schools and add that extra burden of change. Let's go directly to the kids. That's what the point is. Expose them to science and technology people around the country that can give them a passion. Then the schools will react to that on the demand side of this. Also, these extraordinary science, technology, engineering people, if exposed to these kids, I think there'll be a win-win. How do you do it? We have a 21st century education system in the country. It's called media. I mean, every 5-year-old in this country, by the time they're 5, rich or poor, they know who Ronald McDonald is. They know who Britney Spears is, and they know who Shaquille O'Neal is. They spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, trapped in a room, and after 12 years of education, you ask them, can you tell me the name of a single living engineer or scientist, famous? But they can tell you thousands of athletes, thousands of Hollywood people. Said, let's make a sporting event around science and technology. Let's put in front of these kids people that matter, that can help them make career decisions. We convinced 23 companies to donate the time of some of their engineers for literally the same 6-week period as a basketball or a football season, work with kids in a fun environment where they build things and then compete in a double elimination tournament. The first tournament we did in a high school gym in Manchester, New Hampshire in 1992, and everybody in the world that knew what this organization first was in that room on that day. We have been doubling and redoubling a compound growth rate over 15 years of about 55%. And last year, the finals of our event was so large, we had outgrown our 5 years in New Hampshire, then our 5 years at Disney, where they built a stage that in the last year there seats 20,000 people. In 2004, we did our final event at a little place called the Astrodome in Houston. And last year, we did our final event in the home of the 1996 Olympics, the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. We have 10,500 schools, 250,000 kids on these teams. We have teams coming from 31 countries, and all the kids that get involved in this program end up 6 weeks later with a very different perspective on what education is, what opportunity is, what real life is. But we need to change this model of you put them in a school, they go through this process, they take the 3 months off to do all that farm work, as you know. We need to expose kids to real-world professionals that they should see as role models and people they should emulate. That is getting more and more and more impossible to conceive of happening in a classroom. And at the rate of change we have, we need society in general to be responsible for giving kids perspective. And school is a small part of that and getting smaller.
Any final comment from you, Juan, or should we go on to the next? Okay, we're sort of over our time, so we're going to take one last question. My apologies to everyone else who's in line, but you're next, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for insightful discussion today. My name is Yoichiro Ikeda, coming from Japan and KSG student. And my question is about international relationship in 20 years. And one of the most revolutionary incident in 20th century was creation of European Union. And at this moment, some Asian nations seek to same movement, creation of Asian Union. My question is, how do you see this movement? What do you think about this movement's feasibility? That is my question.
Anybody want to take this on? This is, what do you see about the creation of an Asian movement, sort of analogous to the European Union?
Well, I wouldn't do it if it's analogous to the European Union. I don't regard the European Union as a shining example of success. I think that the European Union has, the individual countries in the European Union have consistently faced backwards with respect to all the things you're talking about here. That I think the issues that you raise here about the multiplication of states, I won't even call them nation states, multiplication of centers of power is coming. I think the big question, of course, for Mr. Abe, who is taking over as prime minister, or has already this week in Japan, is how do you get on with China? How do you get on with North Korea when North Korea is lobbing missiles over your territory? And on the one hand, I think that the attempt I think it's inevitable that the Japanese constitution will be changed, and they will become what Japanese Ozawa-san and others have called a normal country, meaning you have your own army and your own navy and so forth. I think that is going to happen. I think the really major question is nuclear, and that the issue of North Korea is, I think, the importance of that is underestimated to us at this side of the world, but clearly not in Japan, and so on. So I think that the issue of creating a kind of European Union of Asia, I don't think is all that central. There are other issues that I think are more pressing.
So let me take a little crack at this. In 1975, the average Brazilian was earning about 3 times what the average Korean was earning. Okay, so the average Brazilian was about 3 times as rich as the average Korean. And Brazil at that point decided it was going to be the best in the world. And what it did is it went out and it selected the smartest, the best, the toughest of all kids in grammar school and high school, and it didn't matter if they were black, brown, white, Chinese descent, rich, poor, didn't matter what the last name was. They just cared if they were the best. And they started training them. And they trained them in grammar school, they trained them in high school, and Brazil went out and they beat the world 5 times, the entire world. The only problem with Brazil's strategy is it chose to do that in soccer. During the same period of time, Korea decided to do that in science and math and did what Dean's talking about. The net result of that is today Korea has about the same number of engineers as does the United States. And they're the 4th largest patent producer in the United States. And if you want to see the difference between what happened in Latin America over the last 25 years or 30 years and what happened in Asia over the last 25 or 30 years, is Latin America absolutely ignored the fact that the dominant language in the world had changed and the way you generate wealth had changed. And what you've got now, I think, is an era where Asia really has paid attention to this. And there's a very quick way of seeing it, right? When you go into a Latin American church, all the saints have little candles in front of them. They've got these little silver things that, are the miracles. They fixed my arm, they fixed my leg, they gave me a job, they did this. So you go on your knees and you pray to the saint. And the saint fixes it, and you've got these little ex-votos sitting there. When you walk into the Chinese church in Kuala Lumpur, you also see miracles hung in that church. But the miracles are that Grandpa Chen was able to get a diploma from Cambridge or Oxford. And then next to that, you see the next set of miracles because Grandpa Chen's 3 kids got into Harvard and MIT. And the next thing is all of the little grandchildren, and they went to Caltech, and they went to Stanford, and they went to a series of things, and by the way, maybe there's somebody who won one of Dean's competitions. What I'd like to see over the next 20 or 30 years is people not to take their countries for granted. I talk about why countries fall apart, not because I want Mexico to split, or the US to split, or Canada to split. I love these countries. I have the greatest respect for these countries. It frustrates the hell out of me when people take countries for granted and assume that what they've had will be. Because they're going to end up like Europe. They're going to be a Disneyland for adults. And they're going to be irrelevant. And if we don't start fixing this education system, and if Fernando Reimers, who's leading this movement at the School of Education, can't get his points across, and if Dean doesn't get together with Fernando to bring science and math into this stuff, we are going to lose what we've had and what we've built. You cannot keep running 2 wars and keep cutting taxes. You can't tell people that a tax cut is a tax cut when all it is it's a deferred payment where you and I pay less but our kids owe more. That is simply a loan taken out at a high rate of interest. That is not a logical way to run a country. The current debt in this country, in terms of what we promised people, is $473,000 per family. That is not sustainable. The world's reserve currency now belongs to a debtor nation. That is not sustainable. This country is now 17th or 18th on the International Math and Science Test. That is not sustainable. This has got to change. Unless, of course, if you don't want to survive. That's also an option.
I'd like to add something. That there is a campaign against science in this country.
Oh yeah, that's why.
And that it is not just the Bush administration. It is it makes itself felt in many different ways. Postmodernism was not a friend of science. There are many, many movements, religious movements as well, that are in fact enemies of scientific thinking. And the division, for me, the difference between science and other ways of approaching, quote, truth, is that science is probably the only one, compared with How do we decide what's real, what's true? Well, for the most part, we rely on a handful of criteria. One, it's got to be true because everyone says so. Consensus. Two, it's got to be true because we've thought that for 1,000 years. There must be something to it, right? Three, authority. Authority could be a scientist, but it could also be a guy, an actor in a white suit, a white coat, pretending to be a doctor on television, be your authority for taking some medication. We have all these different ways of deciding whether to believe something or not. Science is the only one which is different from all of those in that its job is not to confirm truth, but very often to disconfirm former proof. To look at the ways we've thought about things and say, there's another way of thinking about that. And I therefore believe the attack on science is an attack on our most important intellectual component for dealing with any of this stuff. It is not just a question of, and it isn't just biology, and it isn't just engineering or mechanics. It is how we think. And if we think in terms of certainty, and if we think, if we rely on many of these other forms of truth validation, shall we say, I think we're going to be in deeper trouble than we can imagine. And so I think that we need to consciously be aware of where science is being attacked. By the way, I would say probably more important than Washington is Hollywood. When I grew up, scientists were heroes. Now, they're very often villains.
Very good discussion on which to end. Thank you very much, and I want to thank our distinguished panel. Hope that we will see them again at the Kennedy School.